This is the man you see in the picture. He is the man who stabbed his 7-month pregnant girlfriend 37 times, extinguishing not just one life, but also the small, innocent one she carried within her. This horrific murder was not the end of his act, but merely the beginning of his final performance. How did a story that began with promises of love and a shared future descend into such an unimaginable tragedy? Join us as we pull back the curtain on this dark tale, a story that reveals the terrifying mask a monster can wear. A story that begins not with a scream, but with a calm, chillingly composed phone call to the police. Asterisk, the night of May 28, 2023, in a small, quiet town in Italy, was cloaked in an unusual silence. Around 11 p.m., Giulia Tramontano's life came to a halt, but the world would not become aware of this fact for several agonizing hours. At 29 years old, Giulia was 7 months pregnant, her life brimming with dreams for the future. That night, however, those dreams were brutally cut short. As dawn approached and her absence was first noted, a man calmly picked up his phone. It was nearly 9 a.m. the next morning when Alessandro Impagnaciello called the police station. His voice was steady, perhaps a little tired, but unnervingly composed. "My girlfriend, Giulia, is missing," he stated. "We had an argument last night. She packed a suitcase and left. I have no idea where she went." Police units arrived at Alessandro's home shortly after. The young man met them inside, dressed in a simple t-shirt, his eyes showing not the sleeplessness of a worried partner, but the strange alertness of someone who had been preparing. He gave them a tour of the apartment. "Everything is in its place," he said, "but Giulia is gone." He pointed to a space in the closet. "She took her suitcase from here. Her footprints are still at the door." One of the officers turned his head. There was dust in the hallway, but no fresh footprints. They looked more closely. They couldn't see Giulia's footprints, but something else inside caught their attention. The heavy, sharp scent of a chemical cleaner, bleach. The living room floor was still damp in places. The area rug was missing entirely. In one corner, the parquet flooring looked as if it had just been scrubbed, and on the leg of a chair, a dried reddish-brown stain clung stubbornly. "Did you go out at all last night?" a police officer asked. Alessandro hesitated for a fraction of a second. "No," he replied. "I was just inside. I was very shaken after the argument." It was in that moment that the first seed of suspicion was planted in the officers' minds. A woman, 7 months pregnant, had supposedly packed a suitcase and left in the middle of the night after an argument. Yet her cell phone, her ID, and her charger were all left behind. Even Giulia's favorite ring was sitting on the nightstand. Alessandro's story was neat, but it was too neat. It felt rehearsed, as if someone had meticulously tried to stage a scene of normalcy, to make it look as though nothing had happened. Giulia Tramontano was a woman who loved life. When she moved to Milan in 2020, she was chasing a new beginning. She quickly rose in the world of architecture and real estate, with ambitions to start her own business, live freely, and one day build a family. It was during this period that she met Alessandro. He was a charming and talkative bartender, and Giulia had told her friends that she felt safe with him. But in the background, a darkness was slowly creeping forward. Alessandro's past was not as far behind him as she believed. Unresolved issues from previous relationships and an insatiable desire for control were silently trailing him as he grew closer to Giulia. The police began to examine Giulia's final 24 hours. The messages she sent to her mother, Lara Donna, and her close friend Chiara, on the night she disappeared, played a critical role. "This argument has destroyed me," she wrote. "I feel so terrible. I'm scared." The messages revealed that Giulia was emotionally devastated and deeply uneasy. Despite these messages, Alessandro had told the police that it was all a minor misunderstanding. We argued, but it was nothing to make a big deal about. She's a bit emotional. But the bleach in the air, the missing rug, the damp floor, and the fact that Alessandro had waited hours to call the police, all of it screamed that there was, in fact, something very big to make a deal about. The first question in the minds of the police was where Julia had gone. But the lead detective, surveying the scene, rephrased the question. Did Julia leave, or was she made to leave? Alessandro's detached demeanor, his failure to ask Julia's family for help, and his limiting the missing person report to a mere formality, these were not the actions of a frantic lover, but of an actor playing a part. Alessandro still believed he was in control, but he was unaware that Julia's disappearance was no longer being treated as a missing person case. It was about to become a murder investigation. From the outside, Alessandro Impagniscello was the picture of urban charm, a handsome, confident man who navigated the streets of Milan with an air of sophisticated ease. Born in 1993, he was not yet 30, but he had already mastered the art of influencing people. His job as a bartender at a luxury establishment put him in nightly contact with the city's elite, financiers, influencers, and real estate tycoons. In this environment, appearing successful was far more important than being successful, and Alessandro played this role with consummate skill. His colleagues described him as charismatic but superficial. He never revealed his true feelings, but he was known as the relaxed, fun-loving guy who enlivened the atmosphere. Everyone assumed he was living a happy, fulfilling life. But behind the curtain, the reality was far more complex and sinister. In the early days of their relationship, Alessandro was kind and affectionate towards Julia. He masterfully selected the right words to make a good impression. But this was not the language of love. It was the language of strategy. Alessandro was a manipulator. Shortly after they began living together, his true face began to emerge. The jokes were no longer warm. They were subtle barbs, tiny needles of ridicule designed to prick at Julia's heart. He would mock her accent, making veiled references to the supposed cultural inferiority of people from southern Italy. He would belittle her favorite football team in front of everyone, systematically devaluing the things Julia cared about. At first, Julia thought this was just Alessandro's sense of humor, but over time she understood. It wasn't a joke. It was a form of humiliation. Their arguments became more frequent. Alessandro would fly into a rage over the smallest details, from the arrangement of glasses in the cupboard to the way Julia answered his questions. He would interrupt her, and some days he would refuse to speak to her for hours. Then, the next day, he would act as if nothing had happened. Julia grew weary, exhausted by this psychological pendulum. She could no longer distinguish what was real and what was part of his game. But she had yet to discover the biggest game of all, Alessandro's double life. While Julia believed Alessandro was working long nights at the bar, he was living another life entirely. Some time ago, he had grown close to a young woman named Allegra, whom he had met at his workplace. Allegra had a rising career in the hotel industry. She was multilingual, intelligent, and younger than Julia. Alessandro had told her he was single. He denied that Julia was a part of his life, even claiming that they were just temporarily sharing the same living space while Julia looked for a new place. He propped up one lie with another. To Julia, he was her loving partner. To Allegra, he was a single man. He hid his past from one while promising a future to the other. And astonishingly, nothing came to the surface. Julia felt a certain unease, but there was no concrete proof. Alessandro concealed everything with meticulous care. In late 2022, Julia noticed strange changes in her body. Extreme fatigue, nausea, a missed period. She took a pregnancy test, and the result was definitive. She was pregnant. A mix of shock, fear, and love washed over her. Even though things weren't perfect with Alessandro, Julia had always been open to the idea of starting a family. She planned to tell him the news over a quiet dinner, hoping to see his happiness, maybe a little concern, but at least some excitement. However, Alessandro's first reaction was a single question. "Are you sure?" In that moment, Julia felt everything. There was no joy or fear in his expression, only a void. After that, he never brought up the subject again. He didn't ask about doctor's appointments or discuss future plans. Julia was left alone not physically, but emotionally. Yet she didn't give up. She wanted to have this baby. Despite Alessandro's indifference, a mother's instinct had made the decision for her Dot as Julia continued with her pregnancy. Alessandro's other life was also changing. In early 2023, Allegra announced that she too was pregnant. Now, Alessandro's web of lies was collapsing upon itself. The idea of having a child with either woman shook him, and unlike Julia, Allegra was still undecided. Alessandro decided the child should not be born. He told Allegra he would be there for her in any case, subtly suggesting the idea of an abortion, not to offer support, but simply to maintain control. He even accompanied her to the procedure, not out of empathy, but for assurance to make sure Allegra's pregnancy was truly over. Now, only Julia remained, and she had no intention of backing down. Alessandro's plan was clear. He had to convince Julia to change her mind. But Julia had already made her decision. She would have. Her baby. She had made this choice for herself, not for him. Perhaps she could live a life without Alessandro, but as a mother, she could not harm her own child. She was ready to take control of her life and live it on her own terms. But there was something she didn't know. This decision would not just trigger a breakup, but a series of much darker events. And as Alessandro began to retreat in the face of Julia's determination, he was not escaping. He was heading for a much greater fall. Julia's refusal to have an abortion was a symbol of the control Alessandro was losing internally. His plans had been upended by her unexpected resolve. The feeling that he could no longer control events fed the dark, domineering side of his personality, and he slowly, consciously, began to walk down an irreversible path. In late 2022, he began systematic research into poisonous substances. He searched the internet for ways to harm people without being detected, studying everything from plant-based toxins to industrial chemicals like cyanide, ricin, and arsenic. However, most of these substances were either difficult to obtain or would leave easily detectable traces in the body. Finally, he made his decision: rodenticides. They could be procured without a prescription, and certain types caused a slow-acting damage to the body, producing symptoms like internal bleeding, weakness, and nausea symptoms that could be mistaken for pregnancy complications. In early 2023, Alessandro began to implement his plan. He appeared to be supportive of Julia, standing by her side, all while secretly mixing microscopic doses of poison into her food and drinks. It was a slow, insidious plot. Julia soon began to experience constant fatigue, dizziness, nausea, and severe abdominal pains. "I think I'm having a difficult pregnancy," she told her friends, unaware that the reality was far more sinister. But Alessandro's patience was wearing thin. The poison wasn't working as quickly as he had hoped. Julia's body was resisting, and the baby continued to develop. His first plan had failed. He had to find a new way, and this time it would have. To be sharper, more brutal. All the while, Alessandro meticulously continued his manipulations. He told Julia he still loved her, claiming they were just going through a temporary crisis. When she asked questions about his past, he would either change the subject or avoid giving clear answers. But through the cracks in these quiet lies, Allegra was beginning to see the truth. Alessandro never spoke of past relationships and refused to show his social media accounts. At first, this seemed like a simple desire for privacy, but over time, it turned into suspicion. The real turning point came when Allegra, by chance, found recent and intimate photos of Alessandro with Giulia on his phone. The photos were clear, proof that they were still together. Initially, she couldn't make sense of it, not wanting to jump to conclusions. But Alessandro's stories of working late, combined with his delayed and contradictory responses to messages, made her suspicions grow. Finally, Allegra confronted him directly. Without hesitation, Alessandro claimed that Giulia couldn't handle the breakup and had sent the photos specifically to hurt her. Allegra wanted to believe him, but the answers were losing their credibility. As she asked more questions, his story began to fall apart. In a panic, he invented a new lie. Giulia was pregnant, but the child wasn't his. He even forged a fake DNA test to prove it, modifying a report he found online to make it look as if Giulia was playing a grand game against him. Allegra partially believed this so-called proof, but the uneasy feeling inside her would not go away. A few nights later, while Alessandro was asleep, she took his phone and called Giulia. The person who answered wasn't angry or obsessive, but someone searching for answers, trying to understand what was happening. At that moment, Allegra made a decision. They had to speak face to face. The two women met at the hotel where Allegra worked. They were tense but resolute. Allegra told Giulia what Alessandro had said, that they had broken up, that the baby wasn't his, and about the supposed DNA test. Giulia responded quietly and clearly. The DNA test was fake. No such test had ever been done. The timing of the pregnancy perfectly matched the period when she and Alessandro were together. Moreover, Giulia still thought they were together. She explained that Alessandro had never given any signal of a breakup and that they had been making plans for marriage. With every passing minute, the fog in Allegra's mind cleared. They were not rivals. They were caught in the same web. After a conversation lasting about an hour, one truth became crystal clear to Giulia. Alessandro had deceived them both. When Giulia returned home, she didn't wait. She told Alessandro everything that she knew about his lies and that they were no longer together. She was moving to Naples and never wanted to see him again. That night, she sent a brief message to her mother and sister. "It's over. My decision is final." They offered their support, but Giulia didn't know that this would be the last message of her life. For Alessandro, everything was out of control. Giulia no longer believed him. The game was over. The image and control he had built for years had crumbled in a single night. Giulia's quiet determination enraged him further. If she told others what had happened, his life would be ruined. The tension in the house was high. Alessandro tried to talk to Giulia, but she was like a wall, continuing to pack her things. He shouted, he threatened, he took refuge in words of love, but Giulia remained silent. And the more she was silent, the more his rage grew. Around 10 p.m., Giulia had closed her suitcase and was walking towards the door. She was wearing a beige coat, loose enough not to show her pregnancy. Alessandro made one last attempt. For him, convincing Giulia was no longer just a matter of love or pride. He was terrified of losing control, of his life's slipping through his fingers. His tone turned to pleading dot, and in that moment, Alessandro's eyes drifted to the kitchen. On the counter lay the bread knife he had used a short while ago. His brain silenced all words, all logic. An instinctual panic took over. Giulia was just a few steps from the door. Alessandro quickened his pace. With his left hand, he grabbed Giulia's coat, causing her to stumble. Then he took the kitchen knife in his right hand. The first blow struck Julia in the back. She let out a scream, not of pain, but of shock. She tried to turn, but Alessandro continued, swinging the knife again and again, into her back, her side, the edge of her neck. Julia was no longer screaming. She was struggling for breath, collapsing to the floor. Her hands went to her belly, as if still trying to protect her baby. It was her last movement. 37 stab wounds. Alessandro's hands were covered in blood, his breathing ragged. Neighbors later recalled hearing a muffled gurgling sound from the apartment below that night, not a scream, but the suppressed sound of a final struggle for life. Julia's lifeless body lay in the open space between the living room and the kitchen, her blood spreading across the parquet floor, reaching the edge of her suitcase. Her baby, along with her, was now enveloped in silence. Alessandro froze for a moment, the knife still in his hand. Then reality came rushing back. The first thing Alessandro did was throw the knife into the sink, running it under the tap. But the blood seemed frozen on the blade. He poured soap, scrubbed with a sponge, then gave up. His hands had already touched everything: the kitchen, counter, the doorknob, Julia's coat. His eyes fell on her phone, which had fallen out of her coat pocket. The screen showed an unread message from her mother. "Are you okay?" Alessandro immediately began to plan. He picked up the phone, used her fingerprint to unlock it, and sent a short message to Julia's mother. "I need to be alone for a bit. Please don't call me." He then messaged her best friend. "My head is all over the place. I don't want to talk to anyone for now." The messages were designed to give the impression that Julia had disappeared voluntarily. But there was a problem. The body. His first thought was to move it out of the house. He tried to drag her, but the trail of blood on the parquet floor grew with every step. Panic was mounting. The idea of dismembering the body briefly crossed his mind. He went to the kitchen and picked up the knife again, but after a few seconds, he dropped it. He was neither physically nor psychologically ready for such a horrific act. Nauseated, he leaned over the sink and vomited. His second plan was to wrap the body in a blanket and carry it out through the back exit. However, as he wrapped Julia, he realized it would be nearly impossible to carry her down the stairs. Meanwhile, her blood was seeping through the blanket, creating a stain on the floor that would be difficult to hide. He gathered the blood-soaked rugs, took them to the bathroom, and tried to wash them, but the stains wouldn't come out. He then stuffed them into black trash bags and hid them on the balcony corner, planning to dispose of them in the morning. He changed his clothes, throwing his own and Julia's into the washing machine, but he was afraid to run it for fear of the noise. He tried to clean, but no matter how hard he scrubbed, some things were beyond his control. A strand of Julia's hair, mixed with blood, was stuck under the sofa. Blood had seeped into a scratch on the parquet floor. The prints from the soles of his shoes had spread to other rooms. The evidence was scattered, but Alessandro was oblivious, believing he could manipulate the police as he had manipulated everyone else. When his alarm clock rang the next morning, Alessandro was still awake. He looked in the mirror, his eyes sunken. He washed his face, fixed his hair, put on a simple outfit, and finally he called the police. "My girlfriend, Julia, is missing. We argued last night, then she took her suitcase and left. I have no idea where she went." When the police arrived, Alessandro repeated his story, pointing to the suitcase and the spot at the door where he claimed Julia's footprints were. But the first responding officer noticed a detail: the overwhelming smell of bleach. One corner of the living room had been wiped, but was still damp. The rugs were missing, and there was a tiny drop of blood on the leg of a chair. The first suspicion was born right there. The detectives immediately began speaking with neighbors, and their accounts did not match Alessandro's timeline. Neighbors clearly remembered hearing sounds of an argument, followed by a loud, echoing scream and the slam of a door-nun of which Alessandro had mentioned. The first major blow to his story came when forensic experts found traces of blood in Alessandro's car. Though he had meticulously cleaned it, he couldn't erase everything. A luminol scan revealed Julia's blood in the seat crevices, in the fibers of the trunk floor, and under a floor mat. The second blow came from the common areas of the apartment building, reddish stains on the staircase and in the corridor, which detailed tests confirmed were partially wiped bloodstains. Then came the digital evidence. When police seized his computer, tablet, and phone, the shadow of his guilt became undeniable. His search history was horrifying. Weeks of research on poisons, organophosphates, and substances that could harm a fetus without harming a pregnant woman. And on top of that, the fake DNA test he had shown to Allegra was analyzed. Forensic document experts confirmed it was a downloaded template, with the names digitally altered. He had knowingly fabricated a test to deceive Allegra as the pressure. In the interrogation room mounted, Alessandro's story began to crumble. Finally, faced with security camera footage showing him making multiple trips to the apartment garage in the days after Julia was reported missing, each time carrying large, heavy bags and returning empty-handed, he confessed. He told them where he had hidden Julia's body. On June 1, 2023, police found the decomposing body of a woman in a wooded area near Sanago. It was clear an attempt had been made to burn the body, but the job was left unfinished in a panic. The forensic report revealed that Julia had been stabbed 37 times, with some blows delivered from behind while she was defenseless. It was a crime of rage, but also a planned act of annihilation. Julia's death sent a shockwave through the nation. The streets of Italy were filled for days with hundreds of thousands of people demanding stricter laws against femicide. In Milan, Naples, and Rome, marches were held in Julia's name. Her sister, Chiara Tramontano, addressed a crowd. "My sister is dead because when someone realized he couldn't control her, he chose to destroy her." This is not just her story. It is the story of all of us. During the trial, Alessandro's psychological evaluation was striking. Experts noted his narcissistic personality traits, a profound lack of empathy, and a tendency to become dangerous. When he lost control, he showed remorse, but it was unconvincing. Julia's family did not believe his tears, because every detail of the event bore the marks of a planned destruction. Allegra also testified, revealing his double life and manipulative behaviors. At the conclusion of the trial, the verdict was delivered: life in prison. The judge stated in his closing remarks, this was not a momentary rage, but a planned annihilation. The victim, along with her 7-month-old baby, was torn from life. This is a crime committed against all vulnerable members of society. Julia's story ended, but her voice was not silenced. Her death resonated throughout society, becoming a call for better protection for women and for victims to be heard sooner. While this story is over, there are still too many stories that need to be told, too many questions waiting for answers. To continue following the dark trails of true crime together, don't forget to subscribe.